Hi, let me ask you some questions. Why is the sky blue? How does hand washing prevent the spread of coronavirus? And why should we all get vaccinated? These are some questions that teachers might ask students to learn about how or why different phenomena occur. The ability to develop well-reasoned scientific explanations in making sense of natural phenomena is a crucial goal in science education. In this presentation, we'll talk about how we use students' log file data to understand their progression or pattern of performance in scientific explanation. We'll also discuss what kinds of challenges students encounter and why some students were more successful than others in constructing complex scientific explanation. My name is Nani Taik, and I'm a postdoc at the University of Oslo. My co-author is Fredrik Jensen, and he is a researcher at the University of Oslo, as well as the National Project Manager for PISA in Norway. All right, let's get started. So, what is scientific explanation? Scientific explanation is an account that links scientific theory with specific observation or phenomena. For example, they explain observed relationships between variables and describe the mechanisms that support cause and effect inferences about them. To understand how or why different phenomena occur, the explanation framework includes three interrelated components. Claim, it's a conjecture, conclusion, principle, explanation, or questions that address specific phenomena. Claim has to fit with evidence, and evidence also supports claim. Evidence can be drawn from measurement, observation, or data from other studies that have been collected or analyzed. The evidence can be justified with reasoning. So reasoning basically explains the relationship between claim and evidence. It's statements that explain why the evidence supports the claim and why the evidence should count as support for the claim. So, scientific explanation focuses on a specific question about a phenomenon and construct a how or why account for that phenomenon. Okay, so here's an example of how students engage in scientific explanation using the phenomenon of hand washing and coronavirus. We may ask, for example, does hand washing prevent the spread of coronavirus? Based on their previous knowledge, students might create a claim that hand washing with soap is an effective tool to prevent the spread of coronavirus. So, how do we support this claim? Obviously, we need evidence. In the science classroom, students might collect data from an experiment, use model or simulation based on data from other studies. Now that they have adequate data to support their claim, they need to explain why the evidence supports the claim and why the evidence should count as support for the claim. Here comes the reasoning part. So basically, scientific explanation can be divided into three important components: claim, evidence, and reasoning. For example, in this interactive PISA task, students have the opportunity to generate their own evidence using simulated investigation. With log file data, we would be able to identify how students approach scientific explanation tasks and specific challenges they encounter in constructing claim, evidence, and reasoning components. So in the present study, our research question is, how do students construct scientific explanation using simulated investigation? So to answer this research question, we first map students' progressions or their patterns of performance in constructing scientific explanation into a theoretical framework. We then also identify the challenges in constructing claim, evidence, and reasoning using simulated investigation. We analyzed PISA 2015 field trial data from Norway, specifically on the Running in Hot Weather unit. This unit consists of 5 interactive science tasks. So we specifically use the field trial study instead of actual PISA study to show how local file data can be used to examine scientific explanations. Specifically, with the field trial study, we can show the interactive tasks and identify which part of the task are related to claim, evidence, and reasoning. So obviously, we cannot show these components in the actual PISA task since they are not publicly available. So we started by examining students' log file data. We extracted all the data from the XML files and transferred them to a CSV file to make the data structure more explicit. So from the CSV file, we could directly identify relevant variables related to the claim, evidence, and reasoning components. We used process mining with Disco to analyze students' sequence of actions in generating evidence through simulated investigation. So how do students construct scientific explanation using simulated investigation? To answer this question, we examine how students' progression or pattern of performance in constructing scientific explanation can be mapped onto a theoretical framework. In doing so, we modified the claim, evidence, and reasoning framework into different levels of competencies. So we examine all items in the unit running in hot weather and map student pattern of performance in constructing scientific explanation into this theoretical framework. The framework is not yet perfect. We're still working on revising it to fit with the unit itself. So in this framework, we divide claim, evidence, and reasoning into basic, moderate, and complex level of scientific explanation. We also distinguish between domain general reasoning, such as causal reasoning and probabilistic reasoning, and we distinguish domain general reasoning with domain-specific reasoning, which requires students to apply scientific ideas. All right, let's just take a look at some of these items, and we can show you how we map student performance into different level of stages or different level of performance of scientific explanation. On the first item, students are asked to construct basic scientific explanation. You can also use the link here to try the item yourself. So in this item, students need to select a claim by identifying the phenomenon that needs explaining. They also need evidence to know whether the claim they selected was correct. Note that the evidence component in this item was not scored. So that means they only need to select both claim and reasoning correctly to get the full credit. There is no partial credit in this item. So what students can and cannot do in constructing basic scientific explanation? Remember that we have 81 students who participated in this unit in the PISA field trial study. So from these 81 students, 70% of them, or about 57 students, were able to reach stage 1 by identifying basic claim, evidence, and reasoning. The rest of them, or about 24 students, they did not reach this stage. So what happened with them? What did they do? Let's take a look deeper into the different components of scientific explanation. And we found that 50% of these students who did not reach stage 1, they actually selected the appropriate claim and collected the relevant evidence. However, they did not select the correct reasoning. So even though they have the correct claim, they have the appropriate evidence, they did not get any score in this task because only those who got both claim and reasoning correctly will receive a full credit. Now, what's also interesting is that 42% of these students who did not reach stage 1, they actually collected the relevant evidence in the first simulation. This is very important because it shows that these students actually understand the question. They know what kind of data they needed to support their claim. So the data that they collected, this was not a random data set. This was not a random simulation, which actually showed that they were able to generate the data or generate evidence to support their claim. The problem is that they They didn't know how to link between the claim and evidence and provide the correct reasoning. In another item, students are asked to construct moderate scientific explanation. Here, as you can see, the claim and evidence is quite similar with the previous stage, basic scientific explanation. However, the reasoning component is a little bit more complex. Here, students need to use basic scientific reasoning, such as appropriate isolation and control variable strategies, and they also need to develop a causal chain that links phenomena and data. So in this item, students are asked to answer claim, evidence, and reasoning correctly. So all components of the scientific explanation were scored. Again, we have about 81 students, and 41% of these students actually reached stage 2, which means they were able to identify and describe the phenomenon or construct the claim. They were able to generate the evidence, and then they were also able to provide a link that explained the relationship between their claim and evidence. But 59% of these students did not reach stage 2. So what happened with these students? What did they do? Which part of scientific explanation components they encounter a problem? So about 29% of these students who did not reach stage 2, they were actually able to identify the appropriate claim and evidence. Here, they received partial credit. And about 58% of these students who did not reach stage 2, they applied isolation and control of variable strategies to generate the relevant evidence. Now the problem is, even though they generated the relevant evidence, they did not select this evidence. So that separates them with the first group of students. The first group of students were able to identify the claim, they generate the evidence, and then they get partial credit. And the second group of students who did not reach stage 2, they were able to generate evidence, but they were unable to connect the evidence and the claim. And of course, none of these students who did not reach stage 2 were able to explain the reasoning why the claim and evidence were related. Again, here students were asked to identify claim, evidence, and reasoning, similar to the previous task. However, compared to the items in the previous stages, the claim, evidence, and reasoning were much more complex. Hence, we call the stage 3 complex scientific explanation. More importantly is the reasoning part, because here the reasoning students were specifically asked to provide not only general reasoning, but also domain-specific reasoning, in which students need to apply specific scientific theories in order to answer the reasoning part in this item. All right, let's take a look how the pattern of the performance in this stage. Again, we have about 81 students who participated in this unit, and only 21% of them reached stage 3. Which means only 21% or about 17 students were able to select relevant claim, to support the claim with adequate evidence, and to explain the relationship between claim and evidence with appropriate scientific theory. Now, the rest of them, or about 79% of the students, did not reach stage 3. So what did they do? What happened with them? Which components of scientific explanation they had the most problem with? So first of all, 82% of these students who did not reach stage 3, they were actually able to identify the appropriate claim, as well as to select and to generate and select relevant evidence to support their claims. Hence, these students actually received partial credit. 73% of these students who did not reach stage 3, they were actually able to apply isolation and control variable strategies, and they were able to generate relevant evidence. However, these students did not select this evidence to support their claim. So we think that's very interesting because it seems that generating evidence is not the most difficult challenge for these students, but it's rather how they use this evidence to support the claim, and of course how they can explain the reasoning that provide the relationship between the claim and evidence, and as well as to provide relevant scientific theory to support this relationship between their claim and evidence. These two aspects were the most significant challenges for these students that they encounter when they solve this problem, especially in constructing complex scientific explanation. In addition, we also collected some data related to students' behavioral indicators. Now, for the items that require complex scientific explanation, we found that students who answered the item correctly, they conducted a higher number of trials, spent more time before starting their first action, as well as spend higher time on tasks than those who answered incorrectly. In this study, we asked how do students construct scientific explanation using simulated investigation. So by mapping student progression or their pattern of performance in constructing claim, evidence, and reasoning into different stages of scientific explanations, we were able to identify some challenges they encounter in solving the task. So in general, students were able to design an experiment using isolation and control of variable strategies in order to generate data. The challenge here is to use appropriate and sufficient evidence that support their claims. So when students did provide appropriate and sufficient evidence, they often struggle to articulate the reasoning for why the evidence may support their claim. Reasoning is the most difficult component of the scientific explanation for the students. While a number of students were able to show domain general reasoning, such as by clarifying the link between the phenomenal claim and evidence, very few students were able to apply domain-specific reasoning using relevant scientific theories that support this link. So these students have difficulty in articulating what scientific theory they needed to use to answer the questions or to select evidence to determine the answer. So how can we explain these findings? So we argued that these challenges might relate to student engagement in scientific explanation related practices in the classroom. Now, according to PISA 2015 and 2019 reports, Norwegian students had fewer opportunities to engage in inquiry-based activities or scientific investigation activities compared to students from other countries. So some studies also showed that even when Norwegian students participated in inquiry-based activities, they spent more time in collecting data rather than discussing the result of their investigation or engage in argumentation. Now, finally, I think our study also highlights the potential of using log file data to gain a deeper understanding of students' ability in constructing scientific explanation using simulated investigation. So rather than solely relying on what has been achieved or the accuracy of student responses, whether the student answered the item correctly or incorrectly, log file data also offer additional insights to understand how these responses were produced. So this that we use, I think we believe that this has a great potential, especially in understanding how students construct complex scientific explanation. Again, our study is still a work on progress, and of course we still have a lot to do to complete it. Thus, we'd really appreciate any comments and suggestions to help us to improve our study. Thank you.